Next, from the state capitol, the House Committee on Pensions and Personnel holds an informational hearing on Governor Rauner's proposals to reform municipal pensions. Among the proposals are an effort to consolidate the management of many of the hundreds of municipal pension funds to save on administration costs. This runs about 1 hour.
And thank you very much, Madam Chairman and members of the committee. I always appreciate the opportunity to appear before you to discuss matters that are important to the Associated Firefighters of Illinois and our 15,000 members and 220 locals across the state. I'm especially appreciative to be able to briefly comment on the impact that the governor's most recent proposal would have to our membership. I think I would be fair in calling it probably the most devastating impact of a piece of legislation that I've seen certainly in the last 11 years in regards to unwinding many things that have been developed over the years and the rights and benefits of our members that I believe translate into making Illinois a safer place to live. Although it's touted as a pension reform bill, as the previous panel mentioned, it certainly goes a lot farther than that. And one of the largest impacts that I wanted to begin to discuss and mention would be the diminishment and outright gutting of the collective bargaining rights of firefighters in Illinois. The bill takes away the right for public employees, including police officers, security officers, and firefighters, to bargain over wages and hours. And I believe reneges on something that happened in the mid-'80s that was part of a grand bargain. Throughout the 70s and the 80s, there were a series of job action strikes throughout the state of Illinois where firefighters were unhappy with their working conditions. They believed they weren't able to adequately perform the services to the citizens, and the only recourse they had during that time was going out on the street, walking off the job, and demanding public support and change in the employer's approach to managing the department. It culminated in 1980 with a strike in the city of Chicago that was resolved with their first collective bargaining agreement subsequent to it. In the early 80s, the General Assembly recognized that this was not in the best interest of the citizens in Illinois, this was not in good public policy, and developed collective bargaining for police officers and firefighters. And it was an exchange. They took away a very basic inherent right of an employee, and that is the ability to strike, in exchange for your ability to bargain with your employer over wages, hours, and conditions of employment. And while the presentation by the governor's staff last week, they did a good job, and I respectfully disagree with their characterization that subsequent to the passage of the governor's proposal, there would still be a robust list of items that were part of collective bargaining for all employees and certainly firefighters. There would be very little to bargain over, and many things that identify the resources and our ability to access the resources to be able to adequately protect citizens and communities across the state. On pensions, the bill creates Tier 3, a very weak defined benefit system layered with a defined contribution system. While ideologically, as it applies to all employees, our organization doesn't believe that it provides retirement security in a manner that's responsible to make sure that people are able to take care of themselves beyond their working years, particularly people who are working physically demanding jobs like firefighters. In terms of the creation of Tier 1, we stand with our brothers and sisters in public employment across the state and believe that the diminishment of benefits is unconstitutional. We believe we will be right back into the courts, spending untold millions of dollars only to end up in the same place and without a long-term solution. We don't believe that it is wise to go down that path again. In regards to Tier 3, while we don't believe it provides the level of retirement security that employees should receive, we also believe, we hope it's an unintended consequence. In Tier 3 for firefighters in the governor's proposal, it increases the retirement age to 55 or 60 depending on the years of service. We did a study when we were negotiating Tier 2 in the original pension reform, and what we found was, as an employee ages, and it probably doesn't take a mathematician or someone who, a statistician to figure this out, but we went back and looked at the data from the Department of Insurance and worked with actuaries as to what they used for the assumptions of calculating what the employer cost for firefighter pensions would be. And what they found was a 50-year-old employee was 5 times more likely to become disabled than a 30-year-old employee. Now, when you go up into the older age, a 60-year-old firefighter, they predict, was 9 times more likely to suffer a permanent disability than a 50-year-old firefighter. So we believe there would be an unintended consequence of having firefighters work longer. There would be an impact to the number of people who are injured on the job, which certainly has an economic impact. But it also has another type of impact that I think everyone should remember when we're making these decisions. When someone gets injured at an emergency incident, that means they are not able to work next to that employee that they're responsible for making sure when they go into a fire they come out together, and they are also unable to effect a rescue for someone that is in need of help. So there's certainly a greater impact than just in dollars and cents, but we believe it would be suffered in both areas. The ironic part about the Tier 3 proposal and the increase in the number of disabilities is the governor's proposal also guts the Public Safety Employee Benefit Act. Representative Zalewski asked a question earlier regarding what we believe the language in the proposal would result in, and we believe that no one, unless you are killed at an emergency incident, regardless of the severity of your injuries, would qualify for health care subsequent to becoming injured on the job. And I think everyone, again, needs to remember, we're not talking about a windfall for an employee who wins the employment lottery. We're talking about an employee who becomes permanently disabled, unable to ply their craft, take care of their family, and now we are going to provide health care for them when they're no longer able to serve their community when injured performing their job. So we are very opposed to the governor's proposal on the elimination, we believe, of PSEBA. In regards to the extension of the amortization period from 2040 to 2055, a 15-year increase in that mortgage time to pay off the unfunded liability that currently exists in those plans. A couple of thoughts. One, in 2011, when they passed Tier 2, they extended the amortization period for downstate and suburban police and fire by 7 years, from 2033 to 2040. They also lowered the funding target from 100 to 90%, providing significant savings for the employer on the contribution. That combined with Tier 2 for any employee that was hired subsequent to January 1st, 2011, which was about a 50% savings for the employer, we believe went probably beyond where we should have been at that time, but again, it was the result, as Mayor Tisdale referred to, a negotiations and discussion with the employers about them being able to meet their obligation while preserving the benefit. We did a very preliminary view, and I'm happy to share this individually, as to the impact of extending the amortization period 15 years because of how much it lowers that employer contribution in the early years as it builds up into a ramp to 2055. That loss of cash flow in our most poorly funded plans may lead to insolvency, or it would certainly lead to a point where they are burning far more cash and income than they are in paying benefits than they have coming in by lowering that. We also don't believe it's fiscally responsible. Representative Ives pointed out about being responsible to the taxpayer earlier. Extending the amortization period 15 years cost billions of dollars more in funding the 650 different police and fire pensions over that period of the amortization. In regards to the consolidation of the 650 police and fire pension funds into IMRF, I view that less as consolidation as a forfeiture of assets that are in place to pay retirement benefits for police and firefighters. What the bill does, it requires all of the pension funds in the state, police and fire, downstate and suburban, to give their assets, those dollars that have been contributed for their retirement security and they're in charge of managing, to an outside entity that they have no representation on the board, no input into the decisions as to how that money is going to be invested or managed, and hope for the best, while still trying to administer decisions and benefits at the local level. We don't believe that's the right path. We stand firmly committed to making changes that make our funds able to increase and maximize returns while limiting expenses, but this is not the right solution. So that is just brief points on each one of the components, how it would negatively impact our members, how we believe it would be not in the best interest of the employees that protect the citizens in Illinois, nor in many cases for the citizens themselves. I'd like to just take a moment to thank those of you who have been standing with hardworking employees, whether they're public or private, in the state, pushing back against proposals like this that would certainly change that dynamic here in Illinois, and our members recognize that and appreciate the work that you're doing on their behalf. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Chris Southwood. I'm the president of the Illinois Fraternal Order of Police, representing approximately 32,000 active and retired law enforcement professionals across the state, and I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to address this committee as well. The current pension proposal is an all-out assault on law enforcement throughout the state, regardless of what department or agency they work for. This proposal represents the most egregious diminishment and impairment of retirement, working conditions, health care, and employee trust our organization, the Illinois Fraternal Order of Police, has ever seen. The proposal seems to have three goals as it relates to law enforcement. The first outcome is to achieve insolvency in municipal pension funds at an accelerated rate. The second outcome is to reduce all benefits that allow any certainty for individuals who constantly put their lives on the line. The third outcome is to severely diminish public safety in Illinois by reducing any reasonable recruitment of law enforcement officers. You've all heard testimony on the changes to Tier 1, and I will not waste your time going through these. However, it is important to note that we, the Illinois Fraternal Order of Police, feel strongly that these changes are unconstitutional and unfair. The new Tier 3 that this bill creates, which is exclusive to public safety, is unique in Illinois. It offers a multiplier of 1.5% of final year for each year worked upon retirement. This is the lowest in the state. We actually did not find a lower multiplier for anyone in the country. But we are committed to keep looking. It fails to meet Social Security minimums, both on contributions and on benefits, and we do not understand why this state wants its worst defined benefits for public safety, and why we would set a new national low for disability benefits and widows benefits for people who put their lives on the line for their communities. For individuals who are catastrophically injured in the line of duty, they will no longer receive health care under this proposal. The signal that this sends to men and women in uniform is tragic. As you can imagine, the Illinois FOP opposes this change. Others have spoken about the issues of collective bargaining, and others more knowledgeable than I will continue to speak to it. But it is important to note that this bill is an end to collective bargaining. This end is particularly damaging to public safety, where bargaining and impasses are dealt with differently than in typical collective bargaining. Our communities in this state want continuity in public safety. This proposal eliminates that continuity. The effects of these changes will be to eliminate quality recruitment of law enforcement officers in Illinois. We already have recruitment issues in this state. My own son is applying out of state as we speak. We are already losing qualified candidates across the borders, and we have departments that cannot hire enough individuals. The Illinois FOP was proud to work with Democrats and Republican members of the Illinois House and Senate recently to pass landmark pension reform or police reform in this state, increasing the demands on training and performance of law enforcement to create a better service standard for all individuals in Illinois. This proposal has the potential to eliminate any good that bill will accomplish. Put simply, the real outcome of this proposal will be community bankruptcy, a reduction in safety in every individual in Illinois, and a complete removal of every bargain law enforcement has ever had with its community. This is the worst proposal I have ever seen from a law enforcement perspective in my 26-plus years involved in this profession. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your time this morning. My name is Richard Rash. I'm a director with the Illinois Public Pension Fund Association, the IPPFA. I'm also the president of the Joliet Police Pension Fund and have been for the last 20 years. I'll just address some of the highlights that we see a problem with Mr. Rauner's proposal here, starting with consolidation. Consolidation in 2010, the Marquette Associates, ordered by Kafka, did a report which said the total expenses of the downstate funds are in line with other retirement systems. It also said the savings from consolidation, transition costs, and investment performance, a full discretionary consolidation, are very minimal and would have to be put off for 10 to 15, possibly 30 years before you would notice those benefits. As far as Tier 3 benefits go, there's absolutely no security in defined contribution plans. If you look across the country, other states have gone to defined contribution plans and are moving away from, such as Nebraska now, because the benefits are not there for police officers and firefighters. As far as the Tier 1 employee, the choice model, there is no choice. The choice is to diminish our benefits, and we all know with the recent decision that that's unconstitutional, and we can't stand for it. As far as public safety funding schedules, these lower the contributions and continue to push off the problem that we've had for years, which is a funding problem. We've heard the IRMF talked about numerous times here today. The difference between IRMF and the rest of us was IRMF told the municipalities what they were going to fund these, what their funding was going to be each and every year. That's why they're funded so well. And they have the expanded investment policy, which we've all been a proponent of in the past. We agree. We should open up the funding for the smaller funds so that they are allowed to invest and make the money that needs to be made to continue these benefits. As far as disability cases and judgments was brought up earlier, that we need to make sure that those are being done correctly. The vast majority are. And anyone that would question the police and firemen that are on these boards as doing something wrong is just, it's incredible to me that someone would even question that. There is 2 mayoral appointees on the board who can report back to the mayor and tell them what's going on if there's a problem. But if there is a problem, it's in the minority at best. As far as how we all got here, the bottom line is this funding. It took a long time for us to get where we're at today. Between Joliet to Champaign, it doesn't matter where it was at. We weren't funding these pension funds properly. We were putting them off to the future, kicking the can down the road, and now we want to know how we're going to fix this overnight. We're not going to fix this overnight. In 2011, when we put into Tier 2, that gave the cities some time to get their books in order and start funding these funds correctly. And I believe that that's happening. It's a slow process, but again, it's not going to happen overnight. I thank you.
I am a retired Oak Park police officer. I served there proudly from 1974 to 1994. I currently am the executive director of the Illinois Fraternal Order of Police Labor Council. We represent roughly 500 bargaining units throughout the state of Illinois, and we have close to 13,000 members. I come at this from a number of directions, but first I want to bring the collective bargaining issue. Ironically, Evanston was one of the police departments that got fired in the 70s because their employees walked out. Waukegan, firefighters all over, the union leaders were incarcerated. Collective bargaining became a reality. We've never seen that again. As an annuitant, pension was very important to me then, and it is now, and one of the reasons I became a law enforcement officer. We didn't pay into Social Security, and the employer didn't pay into Social Security. They didn't have to do what every other employer had to do, and every payday pays 7%, 6.75 into Social Security. But in return, they were supposed to be paying into those pension funds, and that was a guarantee made to us. Now, people are turning around and saying, we didn't do that, but you did your job. We can't afford it. It's very simple. It's the same thing as your credit card. You make the minimum payments or no payments at all, and you let the interest grow, which is what the latest plan is. You never get there. This is disguised to me as nothing but an insolvency plan, which is going to have a rippling effect in terms of public safety, firefighters and police officers and public employees in general in Illinois in recruiting and retention forever if this becomes reality. I served on a panel with the Illinois Police Training Board a number of years ago talking about recruitment and retention. And ironically, there were police and fire commissioners, mayors, chiefs of police, sheriffs, all concerned about recruiting and retaining quality candidates. And it wasn't happening to the extent that it had before. It was becoming more difficult. And departments were aggressively going out trying to recruit people. They wanted input from labor organizations on why is this happening. We have gone backwards in terms of Illinois being able to attract quality candidates. We're not an island. And somebody, I'm sorry, I was in a corner there, I couldn't see it, asked about other states. And if you'll notice, they scratched their heads and pointed to maybe Nebraska, maybe Wisconsin. Well, we've looked at the pension programs, and we've looked at where people change from defined contributions or defined benefits to defined contributions. And it's not the panacea that people are leading you to believe. And moving to IMRF, we heard it, it's the restrictions put on the local pension funds that's preventing getting the return that IMRF is able to do. What wasn't answered, at least to my satisfaction, is why is my pension fund money that's 80% being melded with another pension fund that's 30%? Why are we rewarding the irresponsible people and jeopardizing everybody? With that, I ask you, one, not to even consider this smokescreen to insolvency and really decimating, in my opinion, the recruitment of quality candidates in public safety in Illinois. And I thank you for those of you that are standing up to this attack on working class people in the state of Illinois.
Thank you very much. Questions from members? Representative Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I would say to anybody who's watching this hearing, if you are a policeman, if you're a firefighter, or to your representatives here at the table, your kind of public service is honorable, it's noble, it's appreciated, it's a calling. Anybody who puts on a uniform and goes into harm's way is doing an honorable service to the community, whether you're the military, police, fire, a corrections officer, what have you. And we as a society, we appreciate that. We would not function if it wasn't for the sacrifices that you make, the sacrifices that the families make, the stress that is brought home. And so that's very much appreciated. And I think as we discuss this, that has to be first and foremost. But the issue comes back to what can we afford? What as a society can we afford to pay? Because if you enter that profession, it's a choice, it's a decision, but there are going to be sacrifices made. And in light of our current situation, promises have been made that are in jeopardy. And maybe those promises never should have been made in the first place, but now we're dealing with the aftermath of that. And we have to do it in a way that provides stability and sustainability for current members and retirees. And so, starting with that, I would like, for those of you who are watching at home, or if those men at the table, if you have a pen, I just want you to write down a few things. I'm going to give you a few numbers. Based upon the latest COGFA report, May 2015, the financial condition of the downstate police and downstate fire pension funds. There's 2 years that I want you to write down, 2004 and 2013. I'm going to highlight a couple of the towns in my district, the 54th district. Palatine, the Firefighters Pension Fund. In 2004, there were 96 active members and 17 retired members. The average retiree annuity was $40,600. In 2013, there were 92 active members and 48 retired members. The average annuity was $68,000. In Rolling Meadows, we'll come back to those in a second. In 2004, there were 41 active members, 14 retired members. The average annuity was $41,000. In 2012, that's what's shown here, 43 active members, 33 retired members. The average annuity was $69,400. There were others that I was going to highlight, but there are similar numbers in Hoffman Estates and Arlington Heights. Those are some of the other towns I have. I want you to consider how many active employees compared to retired members. So back to Palatine, 96 active, 17 retired. That's a ratio of active to retired of 5.6 to 1. In 2013, it's 1.9 active to 1 retired. The average annuity went up 40%. In Rolling Meadows, in 2004, that ratio was 2.9 to 1. Today in Rolling Meadows, the ratio is 1.3 active members to every 1 retiree. And the annuity went up by 40%. How is that sustainable? How do those municipalities sustain that level of active to retired when you have such a lopsided movement towards people who are actively retired or retired versus active employees? How do we keep that going? I know that's a lot for you to digest, but I guess my question is to Pat, since I mainly focused on fire. Pat, if you could just address that.
Respectfully, I couldn't begin to offer a comprehensive response to the individual funding issues or employee to retiree ratio. I'd love to sit down with you and I have a long conversation and do some homework and come back to you. However, the number of retirees versus number of employees, if you're funding a system appropriately and paying your normal costs over time, would not affect the funding level, because those assets, when that person retired, would be in place to be able to pay that benefit. In regards to the difference in salaries, I don't know what the history is there in regards to bargaining, a number of issues that would affect employee salaries, including management that wouldn't be under the bargaining rules nor collective bargaining, and oftentimes we see abuses and what can skewer a pension payment. One time, I'm a firefighter in the city of Champaign.
Wait a second, abuses? I thought that there weren't abuses. In terms of handing out of
No.
Maybe I misheard you. Go ahead, say that again.
I'm sure you've read in the Tribune and the Chicago Sun-Times where they've identified when employers have offered a chief or a manager
Okay.
a sweetener on the way out the door. That dramatically impacts the unfunded liability of a fund, which causes to a dramatic increase of employer contributions that come from taxpayers. That was the abuse I referred to, so.
All right. You had, during this testimony, it came up that there's a potential increase in workers' comp claims or disability claims past a certain age. I mean, is it possible for your members to work past 50? Maybe not in the firefighting profession, but in another occupation?
I think there's a wide variety, if that question is directed towards me again.
Yes, yeah.
I think based on the individual, there's a wide variety of ages that are appropriate for someone to retire. I do know that there are people in an age range where it becomes more difficult to do the job. And in those times where you have an immediate need to elevate your heart rate and do a number of aerobic as well as, heavy lifting activities, it becomes more difficult and more dangerous as someone increases in age. Mm-hmm. And that's what I believe the data that we looked at when determining the likelihood of disability at a variety of ages, I think that's what was reflected in the data.
And again, I would just like to point out that other individuals within our society, if they're in difficult, physically intensive work, if they can't do that job, they find other things to do. Based upon the work schedules of a lot of the firefighters I know, they hold another job, either as self-employed individuals or working for others in the trades, working as electricians, working as carpenters. I know of someone who has a stump grinding business, just on the side. So I just want to point out that people do other things in addition to their service in the fire department. When we talk about the issues of funding, I think it was Richard, you brought up the point that this is a funding issue. I mean, where does the funding come from? Where should the funding come from?
Well, the funding should have came from the taxpayers for the last 30 or 40 years. And that's been the fundamental problem, is we haven't funded pensions. I think in the 5 state pension funds, I think there's been some admissions that we haven't funded those correctly. And that's the fundamental problem we've had, is we've not funded pensions in the state of Illinois correctly. And until we do that, and we are doing that to some extent now, there's laws in place now that we must fund them correctly. And if we don't, then the individual fund can, in fact, contact the comptroller and take tax money from them if the cities aren't willing to do the right thing and abide by the law by funding them correctly. Because unfortunately, too many cities and villages were not funding these correctly for the last 30 years.
And, speaking, my district is totally in Cook County. Part of the ways our municipalities fund their operations, their pension payments, is by things like sales taxes. So the action of Cook County last week to announce that they were going to increase their sales tax, a lot of the municipalities in my district were screaming that they're going to lose sales tax revenue to Lake County. I'm sure Representatives Cmte and Drury are going to appreciate that very much. But if there are real consequences to the policy decisions that are made, either at the state level or the local level. And just saying that, well, taxpayers should pay more, that's not a guarantee. Due to the mobility of the workforce, due to the mobility of residents. One of you said that you have a relative that's looking out of state for employment. That's the world we live in today, that just raising taxes or raising tax rates is automatically going to fix our problems. I don't see that happening because it's a very fluid situation. People can move when tax rates get too high, be it property taxes or they shop in different places if sales taxes get too high. The last thing, two other things I'd like to point out. One is the issue of, I'll leave it just with one thing. you know, there's an objection, or an objection was raised to this desire to move to our defined contribution plan. I would just like to put in your mind and in the mind of your members that it's politicians who have made promises to you and to your members. Politicians making promises on other people's money, and promises that wouldn't have to be delivered for decades into the future. We're seeing the consequences of that. And your members, in my belief, would be far better off long-term to have that kind of control over their own personal finances, to have a guaranteed amount of money in every single paycheck. So the issue of Social Security was brought up. First of all, Social Security is not a robust retirement plan. What you got was far better. Even if we make changes, it's still far better. But the thing about Social Security is every single pay period, money is being allocated toward that. And that is a strong, positive element of a defined contribution plan, is that your members, every single pay period, they get that money. It's in a fund that they control. It's not something that politicians can abuse or mismanage or any of those things. And so with that, I'd like to turn it back to you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Ives.
Thank you. I have a number of questions. First of all, Mr. Devaney, you work for the Associated Firefighters of Illinois, is that correct?
I do.
And do you hold another job outside of that?
I am a lieutenant for the city of Champaign.
And, I mean, I see you here around here frequently, so you actually have two jobs, just as Mr. Morrison was describing, is that correct?
Yes.
And are you currently receiving a taxpayer-funded pension at all?
I am not receiving a pension benefit. I participate in the Champaign Firefighters Article 4 pension fund.
And how about with your position as Associated Firefighter of Illinois? Do you receive
I'm
any?
an elected board member. I'm not an employee.
You're not an employee, so it's an elected board member. Okay, that's great. Good. Okay, so you spoke to specifically this idea that you didn't think that the consolidation of funds was a good idea.
And that's not what I said, Representative, respectfully. Okay. I said that the forfeiture of Article 4 assets to IMRF without representation or ability to have a say in how those funds are managed, our organization was strongly opposed to it.
Okay, so do you see a path forward for consolidating funds in any way?
I have not been presented with a proposal that shows the efficiency or the increase in returns that many people believe it would. The only study that I've seen was commissioned, and it was a result of the 2010 pension negotiations that led to the 2011 bill that had Tier 2 contribution enforcement, a change in the funding schedule. It also contained a study that the General Assembly required the COGFA to complete. They commissioned that study to a firm in Chicago. I read the study. It's been a number of years ago, so I probably couldn't articulate the many of the details in it, but I don't believe it concluded that it made sense fiscally to consolidate all of the Article 3, which are the downstate and suburban police funds, and Article 4, which are the downstate and suburban fire funds.
Typically, though, would you say that the more money or assets you have in an investment fund, you typically are going to get a better price break in terms of fees? You're probably going to get some better counseling. You're not going to be...
I think the larger funds, it's been my observation, and I am certainly not an expert, and my colleagues here may not agree with me, but I believe I have seen with the larger funds, they are able to, for a variety of reasons, they don't have the arbitrary limitations on asset classes like Article 4 does, depending on their size. They're severely limited to as the type of vehicle assets that they can invest in. So I have seen greater returns from the larger funds. And also I think most people, just from a purely, academic perspective, if you have fewer managers, if you have fewer people who are providing you advice and investing your money, that may also limit fees. I think that that is likely possible.
Okay, because I just think it's maybe the way that we should go, and if you guys can help find a path forward to consolidation of these funds, I think that that'd be a win-win. I mean, when you're looking at this entire report that we just received 2 weeks ago, I mean, even if you just look at the most recent year for returns, you have everything from 0% return on some funds to, you know, upwards of 10%. So you have a huge varying degree of returns, and I just, you know, it's problematic to have all these really part-time pension managers, which is what they become at the local pension boards. They're part-time pension managers without the expertise to really invest this money wisely. And the people left out there hanging for the return are the taxpayers.
On the point that we should be doing everything we can to maximize investment returns for our funds and limit the expenses so the revenue is available to have the assets to pay the benefits that are promised, you and I agree on that point entirely.
Well, of
If
course
that's
we
the
agree on that
question or
point.
the
My point is,
comment.
how are we going to get there, right? Okay, so, I mean, it's kind of interesting, too, if we go to Mr. Rash here. I mean, you're the Joliet Police Pension Fund president, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, well, I mean, I'm just looking at Joliet here, and you've got both the police fund and the pension fund now, and the fire fund. So the police fund last year, 2012, 7.2% return. The firefighters got an 8.2% return. I mean, you have a 1% differential there, and I think it's partly because you have part-time. I mean, you're the president of that pension fund. What is your professional qualifications to manage that pension fund?
We have managers that do that, ma'am.
Well, what are your qualifications to check their work and to know what they're doing?
Well,
Are you making decisions as to what investments they hold, what the mix is? Are you making those decisions? And also, could you articulate to me the exact type of training that you go to, who provides for that training, who pays for that training, how often it happens? And because in the end, the truth is that it doesn't matter a damn thing about what you tell those people to do. The taxpayers are on the hook for your decisions.
Well, we take recommendations from each of our money managers, and we compile them and make the best decision we can with what information that we have. As far as training goes, the IPPFA provides training. It entails 36 hours a year that they have to go to training for, which includes some investment protocol where we're getting information about trends in the world and those type of stuff to make us able to make better decisions on those. But
So you're being told we're not going to invest in Greece bonds, right? You're maybe being told that in the broader perspective of
We
what
were
the
told that,
world's
yes.
doing. Yeah, okay, very good. That's like you read the Wall Street Journal, you can figure that one out. But I mean, my point is that you're getting 36 hours of training. Is that on-site? Do you go to a conference? Are the taxpayers paying for pension conferences around the state or even the country?
They are held inside the state of Illinois. There is 2 main conferences that you can go attend to, or local one-day training that you can also attend, which also qualifies it. There is some online training also through Northern Illinois University that we can take in order to comply with the statute.
Okay, so I have a problem with that. You're getting 1 day of training. You don't have a finance background. You don't have any other training than that. It's something where, they're maybe telling you not to invest in Greece or perhaps Puerto Rico. But to me, you didn't even get the return that many other people got a return on, which is over 9%, 10% last year. And here, the taxpayers are stuck paying for decisions made by folks that have no idea what they're doing, in my opinion. That is my opinion. I mean, and it's truth. And on top of this, the majority of those board members are not people that are proponents for taxpayers. They are people that are aligned with the unions. They are not taxpayers, and yet this is taxpayers that are left hanging for the decisions of that board.
Well, I would disagree with you, ma'am. The bottom line is,
So do you disagree with the fact that the union and their members have a larger representation than the taxpayers on these local boards?
on my board, yes.
That's correct.
I would disagree with you. No, we don't. We have two union members. We have 3 appointees, or 2 appointees and a retiree who was the chief and was not a part of the union. So in ours, it would be only 2 union members. They're elected.
Well, I will say for the rest of the state that that is probably not the case, because by law, they get more members. So it just happened out to be the way that you are doing. Let's go to something else, though, with Joliet, because I'd like to follow along the line with Mr. Morrison's questioning here. I mean, when you look at Joliet, in 2004, if you were a retiree, your average retiree was, you were getting $42,000. And now in 2012, you're getting over $73,000 as your annuity, as a retiree. Now, that's a 54% increase over the span of 8 years. That's a 54% increase over the span of 8 years in the amount of payout that you're getting. And at $73,000, you are, when the average household income, this isn't just an individual household income in the city of Joliet, is $61,000. If you look for the median income of just one single male, it's like $41,000 is the per capita income. And this is income that you earned over the span of 20 years of work. So, I mean, you earn this as an annuity, I get it. But it is far and above the average median income that a working individual in your town even receives, or even a household. It is significantly higher than the median household income that are supporting a pension that people can't even work a job to get and are working full-time. And yet, this is a pension that you're getting after 40 years, or after 20 years. So to say that you're concerned about providing for retirement security, it's unbelievable, because this is also 2 times the amount more than 2 times the amount of the max Social Security you could get, which is about $32,000 right now. More than 2 times the max Social Security that you could get, and that would take in a 44-year career. And that's at the max. That means you maxed out the charts, where the average Social Security recipient receives $15,000. So the benefits, one, have grown substantially in 8 years. And 2, they provide retirement security that is greater than that the working household is getting. And 3, they provide retirement security that is greater than any Social Security person can ever expect to receive. So, I mean, they're out of balance with what taxpayers are receiving themselves and what they can afford. They are completely out of bounds. They're also completely out of bounds if you want to talk about being in a dangerous line of work with what the military would receive after 20 years service. They're completely out of line. And so for you to say that we can't back down these, or that we're opposed to this, or this is a recruiting problem, let's move on to another line of questioning here. How many applicants do you have for every job available? How many applicants do you have in the pipeline?
It depends on which department you're looking at, but across the board, they have said that the applicants have reduced better than 50 and even sometimes 80% less than what they've had in the past.
But
When I
what does that mean
tested
in
for
real
Oak Park
terms?
in
Instead of 1,000 applicants
we had
for one
800
position,
applicants
you
in
have
Oak Park when I tested in Oak Park. Now, if they get 100, they're lucky.
for how many openings?
I didn't know how many openings there were then, and I don't know how, because
So
the
if you have
list,
100
the list
applicants and there's
lasts 3
2
years.
openings, that's a pretty good pool to draw from.
The applicants don't know how many openings there are. The list, when a list expires, they generally run a test, and that list lasts for 3 years. And there's no way of predicting how long how many vacancies will occur during that period of time in the average department. And it also goes to budgeting by the municipality and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of variables, and the applicants don't know when they're testing how many vacancies there are going to be.
Well, it'd be
I'd also
interesting
like
to know
to point
what
out that
those
you're pointing to
hiring
taxpayers'
numbers
money,
are.
but it's also the employees' money that's going into that pension fund at a rate of 10%. And the retirement age is not 20 years, that's the minimum retirement age. And the maximum is currently for police officers, it's 30 years, but that doesn't mean you leave at 30 years.
You can retire on full pension at 20 years, correct?
But not at that average number.
That's not correct, ma'am.
Okay.
You can retire at 50% after 20 years. That's not a full pension by any stretch of the imagination.
Well, we probably need a little more data then to find out what this average retiree annuitant has spent in terms of time on the job. So I'd be interested in that information. Okay, one other thing that you spoke to, sir, I believe, is the intense scrutiny and the training that they receive. Are you saying that they should not receive this intense scrutiny? I didn't understand that whole concept of they're under intense scrutiny and training in a probationary period. I mean, where were you going with that statement?
They actually absolutely should receive intense training. Where I was going with that is it's hard to find qualified individuals who can do the job of a police officer. I can only speak to my agency, Illinois State Police, and we have applicants every year that apply for the state police. Most of them don't make it through the background. If anybody has any indication what it takes to be an Illinois State Police officer, in 1999, I applied for the Illinois State Police. It was a 9-month process. It started with an interview, then a background investigation, then a polygraph test, then a physical fitness test, then a mental evaluation. After that was done, you had an oral interview. Most people in today's society, not all of them, would not even make it through that. So the quality of applicant that you're seeking is hard to find. And then you put on top of it the restrictions on pension, the restrictions on pay, what an officer's paid. All state police officers require a 4-year degree. Most of them have a military background prior to that. You spoke to the military. I wholeheartedly agree with you. Military personnel, I'm a veteran myself, do deserve more money. I wholeheartedly agree with you. But what I'm speaking to is the quality of applicant that you're seeking is hard to find. And once you find that applicant, I've heard it said, I saw it in the press not that long ago. If you want quality people, you have to pay quality amounts of money for them. So
I completely agree with you that we need quality people and quality applicants. I completely agree. And
that's where I was going with that.
It is absolutely shameful that our youth today, many of them, disqualify themselves before their 18th birthday for military service or even into the profession that you are in, which is Illinois State Police. I completely agree. It's an atrocity that they can't meet height, weight, fitness standards, that they have a background that does not make them able to serve. It is a problem. On that, we are going to completely agree. I want those training standards to be high, and I want us to have a well-skilled training force. I have no doubt. And I actually have no problem paying folks a reasonable, good salary. I have no problem with that at all. I have a problem putting extraordinary, expensive pensions in it without any controls on the taxpayer side for how these go ahead and get funded and invested and everything else. I have a problem with the pensions. I don't have a problem with the pay. I don't have a problem with the benefits while working. I have no problem with that. I have a problem with the pension problem that has created the biggest problem in the entire country. That's what I have a problem with. I don't have a problem paying you guys fair at all. And I want you guys to keep your high standards. But these pensions have become uncontrollable, and the growth in what you're receiving as an annuity is it's absolutely articulated in this document right here very well in the last 8 years. It's unsustainable. That's what we have to control, and that's what we're about. I'll give you your salary. I can't afford these pensions.
Thank you. Representative Ammons.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for coming and sharing your experience as well as your read on the current proposal. I wanted to ask a few questions that have come up. Let me just go back. My colleague just highlighted the difference in mean salary in Joliet area, for instance. All of those people in Joliet, of course, are not police and fire. So there's a complete distinction between the professions that may be represented in an average of salary in Joliet. And that should be highlighted for the purpose of the discussion that we're in. Those are not apples and apples. The other thing I wanted to ask you all is, are you all a part of Pension Fairness for Illinois Communities Coalition? Are any of you a part of that? No, I mean, any of you labor leaders, police and fire, are you all a part of that coalition?
That's a coalition that was created
municipal
of
governments.
municipal governments, local units of government.
Okay, that's what I wanted to clarify. So you all are not in that discussion. Are you all in, or were you all in the discussion of the current proposal that's been put forward by the governor's office? Did you all meet with them, have any input, direction, anything on that?
In terms of the Fraternal Order of Police, and the Fraternal Order of Police Labor Council, absolutely not.
Okay, all
So,
right.
Representative, I've made requests to meet previously, not over this proposal, and asked to be on the local government and consolidation committee, but did not speak to anyone in the administration about this proposal, no.
Okay, all right. You all have highlighted that there is some real concern that would come from your membership about the consolidation of assets. And I think one of you highlighted, for us in the city of Urbana, for instance, our pension fund and Champaign is funded at almost 90%, 89 as my exiting from the city council. Combining our pension fund and assets with a fund that's 30%, for instance, what impact would that have on your members and what you've currently already put in as assets for your funds, if it's consolidated?
So my interpretation of the language in the bill and my understanding as to how IMRF currently works is that those asset levels and funding levels would not be combined. IMRF has what's equivalent to separate accounts to where each community has their own funding level.
Okay.
So I don't know that in the bill, I'm sure that in other scenarios it may be a concern, but in the bill as this drafted, I don't believe the intent was to have those funds commingled and mix funding levels. The governor's administration is agreeing with.
So not commingling the funds, but removing your ability to direct those funds is what would happen.
My particular opposition was over the ability to be represented as to how the decisions were going to be made and manage those funds, correct?
Yes. A part of this discussion as we ensue this is not just about the amount of annuity. In this bill, there's also discussion about removing many, if not all, of the collective bargaining rights that have been earned since maybe 1920. Over the years, some of those will be stripped away as a result of this bill. Can you talk more specifically, or is there a list that you all have that would be directly impacted if this bill was to go forward?
Well, for example, one of the things that's recommended in here is we do not have the right to bargain over wages. We do not have the right to bargain over seniority. We do not have the right to bargain over health insurance. We do not have the right to bargain over subcontracting.
Okay.
Those are very, very fundamental elements of collective bargaining, which then blossom out into other discussions. And bargaining is exactly that. There's two parties at the table, okay? And ultimately, it's said over and over again, if neither party's happy, it's probably a good process. I'd like to remind what brought collective bargaining about in the state of Illinois, and that was public sector employees, teachers, police officers, firefighters losing their jobs, being jailed because they were so felt labor relations in their communities and whatever was at a point of collapse. And the worst scenario, I think, was the Chicago firefighter strike, where those firefighters were sitting around across the street from the firehouses watching substitute firefighters come in, and then afterwards, for 30-plus years, those people, when it got resolved and collective bargaining came about, sat in the same firehouses and would not even eat at the same table. That is a terrible relationship that we're on the road to going back to, and quite frankly, I think even worse.
And could you just, you made the analogy of, in essence, this is an insolvency plan. You call it a smokescreen to insolvency. I vaguely remember during the campaign period that there was some discussion from Governor Rauner at that point, candidate Rauner, to eliminate public sector unions in 4 years. Would you say that this type of legislation would put you on mark to doing just that?
I believe that the outcome of this would be there's no purpose for a public sector union. There would be no function, and that's what it's designed to do, is one, to make no purpose for a public sector union. You know, I think there was an editorial in the State Journal Register that said if this leaves a lot of topics, I don't know what they are, okay, to bargain over. And then the second thing in insolvency is, while it's up to each municipality to decide whether or not they want to live up to their obligations, it sets the stage for you to become so far upside down in debt that it gives you no alternative. When you move your payments on your credit card to minimum payments over umpteen years, you just become upside down. We see it every day. And that's the scheme here. Now, we were told, we've been in pension discussions for years and years now. This is not new. We've been told, we get into discussions with the Tier 2 system, we go from here, all right, that's the end of it. Well, how long did that last? All right, and I'd like to remind everybody here that while it's taxpayers' money, we're also taxpayers, our families are taxpayers, we commit to the community, all right, we're involved in our communities, but we're also participants at 10% every paycheck. Our number doesn't change, all right? And while it's been implied that we don't have professionals and experts and whatever involved in these pension advisement, we have certified pension planners that are licensed, that can stand the scrutiny of anybody sitting here advising pension boards on how to make their returns. And I don't think it's particularly unusual, all right, that there's differences from year to year in terms of your amount of return based on the philosophy of a pension advisor. I don't see that as significant. But overall, if you're sitting within that range, it's an acceptable range. And if it isn't, those people are no longer legitimized in terms of being financial advisors.
And I'll just say the final closing statement here, that I'm having a hard time seeing how the current proposal differs that much from the previous proposal that was struck down by the courts. And wouldn't this, in essence, still take us back to a diminishment of benefits?
Well, I'm not an attorney, but I've discussed this with a number of people. The insolvency, the bankruptcy, the refinancing, bankruptcy's got to be allowed by the state, okay? But then it becomes a federal issue, all right? Chapter 9, so on and so forth. We'll then take it from state jurisdictions, Illinois Supreme Court jurisdiction, to federal jurisdiction, which is a whole new arena, all right, in terms of how you get around the Supreme Court decision. Now, anybody can draw their own conclusions from that, but I mean, that is an avenue, and I think that, again, I think it's a path to insolvency, and it's hidden in there.
Thank you so much.
You're watching the Illinois Channel. an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.